Hello, and welcome to MTG Basics Ezuri Claw Progress Deck Tech video. I'm Reptile, and we'll be going over my personal brew of Ezuri and the strategies you can employ to pilot this commander more effectively. Before we do so, let's go into further detail about our commander in a vacuum. Ezuri Claw Progress is a 3/3 elf warrior which costs 2 colorless, green, and a blue. Ezuri reads, whenever a creature power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, you get an experience counter. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put X +1/+1 counters on another target creature you control, where X is the number of experience counters you have. Ezuri's game plan is centered around low-power creatures that provide utility or synergize well with +1/+1 counters. While not directly providing mana or card draw, Ezuri allows you to generate value from the command zone by placing these +1/+1 counters on other creatures in the deck as a reputable payoff. These counters also directly increase our creature's power and toughness, allowing any creature to pressure our opponents over time. In addition, experience counters are incredibly difficult to remove or interact with, giving Ezuri resilience when targeted at the table. Now that we understand what Ezuri provides as a commander, we shift our focus to creatures with power 2 or less. While it may seem limiting, many cheap, low-power creatures with great utility are available to us and give us many options when deck building. In this brew, I've decided to lean heavily on an elf ball type strategy. A large majority of our creatures, including our commander, are low-power elves and increase in effectiveness with the more elves we control. Elves as a creature type are known to produce large amounts of mana, which aids in keeping tempo as Ezuri's game plan is often slow to start. Once we've completed our game plan and established our board of elves, how do we win? The most efficient way of closing out games is through the use of extra turns with Ezuri and Sage of Hours. Sage of Hours costs 1 colorless and a blue and reads, Heroic, whenever you cast a spell that targets Sage of Hours, put a +1/+1 counter on it. But more importantly, remove all +1/+1 counters from Sage of Hours. For each 5 counters removed this way, take an extra turn after this one. This combo requires Ezuri and Sage of Hours on the battlefield along with 5 or more experience counters. As you go to combat, Ezuri trigger will place 5 or more counters on Sage of Hours, which will then allow you to take an extra turn and repeat. With infinite turns, you will be able to win through combat provided by our elves. This combat is compact and cheap, and reaching 5 or more experience counters should be a main priority when piloting this deck. While easy and reliable, this combo has multiple points in which your opponents may react and should be attempted when interaction at the table is low. An alternate method of victory comes from Intruder Alarm, Shrieking Drake, and a blue mana producing creature. With Intruder Alarm and a blue mana producing creature in play, you may cast Shrieking Drake an infinite number of times, tapping and untapping all creatures on the battlefield. While not an automatic way to win on its own, there are many ways to win with this method, such as infinite experience counters through Ezuri, infinite elf tokens through Imperious Perfect, and infinite mana into any outlet such as Thrasios Trident Hero. An evolution strategy is also present in the deck, with Prime Speaker's NFR allowing us to repeatedly search under Intruder Alarm. Lastly, if your win attempts mentioned above are interacted with, the board presence you have built up to this point with elves allows you to pressure life totals into the mid and late game when resources are scarce. Being a mid-range deck, our early game is crucial to our success as the game progresses. Our early game will revolve around getting our commander out quickly and accumulating at least 5 experience counters. In order to complete this task, ramping through the very many mana-producing elves in the deck not only provides us with an experience counter, but gives us the mana to cast even more creatures and use the activated ability on our elves to pressure life totals. Prioritizing hands that are able to get out Ezuri and cast creatures will ensure you can make it to the mid-game. Creatures outside of this role are mainly toolbox creatures that allow us to answer threats on board or gain resources. Cards like Fathom Mage or Thrasios give us multiple ways to draw additional cards, while Reclamation Sage and Collector Oof lets us disrupt our opponent's game plan even further. In order to have access to these threats as often as possible, the deck runs a large number of creature tutors to adapt to the situation at board. When going into a pod, it is important to assess the kinds of matchups you might encounter. Decks that are able to outpace Ezuri and win early are problematic, as this forces us to interact early and delay our ability to establish our own creature engine. Conversely, very little stacks pieces interfere with Ezuri and its triggered ability, allowing us to break parity and become a threat through combat in slower games. Because we are a creature-based deck, Ezuri runs multiple null rod effects to shut down artifact-based strategies while continuing to ramp through our own elves. Board wipes and creature removal are of major concern, and our interaction is mainly to combat this and stop our opponents from winning. Given the many options available to Ezuri, one may choose to lean much more heavily into +1/+1 counter synergy. If you decide to take this route, here are additional options that you may want to consider. Cards such as Avabutt Caretaker and Vorinclex Monstrous Raider serve as top-end bombs that generate large amounts of value if unanswered. The pairing of Peer, Imaginative Rascal, and Toothy, Imaginary Friend allow us to increase the amount of counters placed on our our team and draw from those counters respectively. In a similar vein, enchantments such as Hardened Scales, Branching Evolution, and Doubling Season allow us to maximize our commander's trigger each turn. Thank you for tuning in to MTG Basics Ezuri Claw Progress cEDH Deck List video. The list will be in the description below, and if you have any additions you would like to make, please feel free to share your own deck list in the comments below. Thank you, and stay basic.